If someone had asked me 10 years ago what my life would look like, I would have described this apartment. Not the specific floral pattern on the ancient wallpaper in the hall, or the way the floorboard sighed under my feet like a tired old man, but the solitude, the quiet, ordered, predictable solitude. I had built my life like a fortress, wall by wall, routine by routine, designed to keep the world and all its messy, unpredictable emotions at a safe and manageable distance. My work as a freelance graphic designer was done from here. My groceries were delivered here. My life was lived within these 300 square feet of meticulously controlled space. It was safe. It was mine. And it was profoundly, achingly lonely. Then, 6 months ago, the noise started. A new tenant in 3B, the apartment that shared my bedroom wall. The noise was not malicious, not parties or loud music, but the sounds of a life being lived with an unapologetic physicality that was entirely alien to me. The thud of heavy boots dropped on the floor. The low rumble of a voice on the phone. The words indistinct, but the confidence unmistakable. The clatter of weights being lifted and set down. He was a presence, a constant, vibrating disturbance in the carefully curated silence of my existence. His name, I learned from a stray piece of mail left on a lobby table, was Alex. Alex. I saw him only in glimpses. A broad back disappearing down the stairwell. A profile caught through my peephole as he fumbled for his keys, his jaw set in a line of concentration. He was tall, built with the kind of solid, practical strength that comes from working with your hands. He was, in every way, the opposite of me. He was loud where I was quiet. He was chaos where I was order. He was a blazing bonfire to my single, flickering candle flame. And from the safe distance of my fortress, I watched him and I wanted. It was a foolish, hopeless kind of wanting, a secret I kept even for myself most days. He was a man who moved through the world with an assumption of his own welcome, the kind of man who dated women with bright laughs and easy smiles, the kind of man who would never, in a million years, see me. The distance between us was more than just a wall of plaster and studs. It was a chasm of assumptions. He was the straight neighbor, the noisy guy next door, a peripheral character in the quiet story of my life. I was just the silent occupant of 3, a ghost he probably barely registered. We had never spoken. Not once. A nod in the hallway was the most we'd ever exchanged, and even that felt like a monumental effort on my part, a breach of the anonymity I usually clung to like a shield. The barrier was solid, immovable, or so I thought. The day it all changed started like any other. The hum of my computer, the scent of fresh coffee, the familiar gray light of a Tuesday morning filtering through my window. I was lost in the pixels of a new logo design, aligning serifs and adjusting kerning. My world shrunk to the 27 inches of my monitor. The routine was a comfort, a predictable rhythm that soothed the low-grade anxiety that was my constant companion. Then came the sound, not from next door, but from the hallway. A frantic, desperate banging. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a fist hitting a door hard, followed by a string of curses that were sharp and clear even through the wood. I froze, my mouse hovering over a color palette. My first instinct, as always, was to retreat, to become smaller, quieter, to pretend I wasn't there. It was someone else's problem. It always was. But the banging came again, this time on my door. My door. A jolt, sharp and cold, went through me. My heart became a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. No one ever knocked on my door. I crept towards the entrance, my bare feet silent on the floorboards. I peered through the peephole, my breath held tight in my chest. The distorted, fisheye world showed me Alex. He was soaked, his dark t-shirt clinging to his chest and shoulders, his hair plastered to his forehead. Water dripped from his chin onto the worn welcome mat. But it was the look on his face that stopped me. The usual confidence was gone, replaced by a raw, ragged panic. He looked lost. He must have heard me, some tiny shift in the air, because he pressed his forehead against the door, his voice muffled but urgent. "Please, I know you're in there. I can see the light. Please, I need help." His voice wasn't loud or demanding. It was frayed, broken. The sound of it unraveled something inside me, some carefully knotted cord of self-preservation. Before I could think, before I could let the fear win, my hand was on the deadbolt. I turned it. The click was deafening in the sudden silence. The door swung inward, and he practically stumbled into my entryway. He brought the scent of rain and damp concrete, and something else, something uniquely him, a scent of sawdust and clean sweat that I had only ever imagined. Water was pooling around his heavy work boots, threatening the pristine finish of my hardwood floors. My first thought, absurdly, was about the floor. My second thought was that he was even bigger up close. He seemed to fill my entire apartment, a mountain of damp frustration and coiled energy. My pipe, he managed to get out, gesturing vaguely back towards his own apartment. Main water line under the sink just went. The whole place is flooding. I shut off the main valve, but it's a disaster. My phone's soaked, it's fried. He ran a hand through his dripping hair, and for the first time, I saw that his knuckles were raw and red. He must have been trying to fix it himself. The confident, capable man I had built in my head was standing in my doorway, dripping and defeated. My own voice, when it finally came, felt rusty from disuse. You need a phone?" I asked, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. He nodded, his eyes scanning my apartment, my fortress. I saw his gaze catch on the neat stacks of books, the minimalist furniture, the carefully organized desk. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of self-consciousness, as if my quiet, ordered life was a strange and sterile exhibit he was now examining. "And maybe a towel?" he added, a hint of a wry, self-deprecating smile touching his lips for just a second. It transformed his face, softening the hard lines of his jaw. I nodded dumbly and turned, my brain struggling to catch up with the reality of the situation. "Alex, in my apartment." I grabbed the fluffiest towel I owned from the linen closet, a small, ridiculous extravagance. When I turned back, he was still standing by the door, careful not to move further into the room, as if he were a wild animal aware of its own potential for destruction in such a delicate space. I held out the towel. And this is where it happened, the moment the world shifted. As he reached for it, his fingers brushed against mine. It wasn't a lingering touch, not even a full second of contact. It was the briefest, most accidental of collisions. But a jolt went through me, hot and sharp like a static shock on a dry day, but 1,000 times more potent. It shot up my arm and detonated somewhere in my chest. Heat flooded my face. I snatched my hand back as if I'd been burned. My heart, which had been hammering, now seemed to stop altogether. I was sure he must have felt it, this cataclysmic event that had just occurred in the space between our hands. I dared to look at his face. Nothing. He was just gratefully scrubbing the towel over his hair, oblivious. The world had ended and begun again in that single moment, and only I had noticed. "Thanks," he said, his voice muffled by the terry cloth. "Seriously, you're a lifesaver." He emerged from the towel, his hair sticking up in damp spikes, looking younger and far more vulnerable than the imposing figure I had watched from afar. The power dynamic, the one I had imagined where he was the sun and I was a distant, unnoticed planet, had just been completely inverted. He was the one in crisis. I was the one with the dry floors, the working phone, the fluffy towels. For the first time, we were just two people in a hallway, one of whom desperately needed something the other could provide. I led him further into my apartment, my mind a frantic buzz of conflicting thoughts. "He's in your space, your safe space. Get him out. Make him leave." And right beneath it, a traitorous, hopeful whisper. "He's here. He's talking to you. Don't let him go." He sat gingerly on the edge of my sofa, the towel draped around his neck, looking utterly out of place against the cool gray fabric. I handed him my phone, and he started making calls. To a plumber, to his insurance company. His voice was low and steady now, competent and in control as he dealt with the logistics of the disaster next door. While he was on the phone, I found myself watching him, not in furtive glances, but openly. I was observing a specimen that had unexpectedly wandered into my lab. I noticed things I never could have from a distance. The faint white line of a scar that cut through his left eyebrow. the way his thumb worried the edge of my phone case as he listened. The weariness in the set of his shoulders, a deep-seated exhaustion that his usual confident posture concealed. He wasn't just a collection of broad shoulders and a rumbling voice. He was a person, tired and stressed, and currently homeless. He finished his calls and handed the phone back to me, our fingers carefully not touching this time. "Well," he sighed, slumping back against the cushions. "Plumber can't get here for at least a few hours, and it's going to be a mess for days. They'll have to tear up the floor." He looked at me, his eyes a surprising shade of hazel, flecked with green and gold. "Look, man, I'm sorry to just barge in on you like this. I don't even know your name." "Julian," I said, the name sounding foreign on my own tongue. "Alex," he replied, offering a hand. This time I was prepared. I took it. His grip was firm, his palm calloused and warm. The jolt was still there, but it was softer this time, a low hum instead of a high-voltage shock. We were shaking hands, like normal people. It was the most surreal moment of my life. "Well, Julian," he said, letting go, "you've already been a huge help. I should probably go, figure out where I'm going to go." He started to stand up. The words left my mouth before I had a chance to stop them. "You can stay here." They just flew out, untethered to any conscious thought. The silence that followed was immense. I could feel the blood draining from my face. What had I just done? I had just invited the chaos directly into the heart of my fortress. I had opened the main gate and waved it inside. He stared at me, his expression unreadable. I braced myself for the polite refusal, the awkward laugh. Instead, he just sank back onto the couch, a wave of palpable relief washing over his features. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I don't want to impose. I can find a hotel." "It's no trouble," I lied, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my sternum. "It's just a couch." "But it's dry," he smiled, a genuine, tired smile that reached his eyes. "Thank you," he said. And the way he said it, with such simple, unadorned sincerity, made me feel like I had just done something genuinely good. Something human. It was a terrifying and exhilarating feeling. The storm outside was still raging, but the real tempest was the one that had just breached the walls of my apartment and the walls I had so carefully built around my heart. As evening bled into night, the temporary nature of the situation began to feel unnervingly permanent. The plumbers had come and gone, their verdict grim. Alex's apartment would be uninhabitable for at least a week, maybe more. The power in the building, knocked out by the storm, was not expected back until morning. So we were left in the dark, the only light coming from a handful of emergency candles I had dug out from the back of a closet. The flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, transforming my familiar, sterile living room into something intimate and strange. The world had shrunk to this small circle of wavering light. The sounds of the city were gone, replaced by the relentless drumming of rain against the window panes and the low whistle of wind in the eaves. Alex sat on the floor, leaning against the sofa, while I sat in my armchair. The space between us felt charged, thick with all the things we weren't saying. We had exhausted the small talk about the flood, the building, the storm. Now there was only this quiet. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, not exactly. It was a heavy silence, weighted with a kind of shared vulnerability. We were two strangers, trapped by a storm, suspended in a moment outside of normal life. I watched the candlelight play across the planes of his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the dark sweep of his lashes. He was staring into the flame of the candle on a coffee table, his expression thoughtful, his usual mask of easy confidence completely gone. In the flickering gloom, he looked less like an intruder and more like a refugee. "You know," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to be absorbed by the darkness. "It's weird, he didn't look at me. He just kept his eyes on the flame. My place is a mess. All my stuff is probably ruined. I should be freaking out." He paused, and I waited, barely breathing. But I'm not. Right now, I just feel calm. He finally turned his head and looked at me, his hazel eyes searching my face in the dim light. "It's so quiet in here. Your apartment. It's always so quiet." My stomach did a slow, nervous flip. He had noticed. He had been aware of my silence on the other side of the wall, just as I had been aware of his noise. I, I work from home. I stammered, the excuse sounding feeble. I needed to be quiet to concentrate. He nodded slowly. I always figured you were like a writer or a monk or something, he said, and a small smile played on his lips. I'm sorry if I'm ever too loud. The weights and stuff. It's fine, I said, and it was the truth. His noise had been a presence, a reminder that I wasn't entirely alone in the universe. It had been, in its own strange way, a kind of company. I never minded. We fell back into silence, but it was different now. A thread had been thrown across the chasm between us. We had acknowledged the wall, and in doing so, had made it less of a barrier. He sighed and ran a hand over his face. My girlfriend, ex-girlfriend, I guess she used to hate how quiet I could be. Said it was like I was hiding. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Funny, huh? Me being the quiet 1 inch. My breath caught. Excuse. The word hung in the air between us, shimmering with possibility. It was a single, casual breadcrumb, but to a starving man, it was a feast. I tried to keep my voice even neutral. People are complicated. It was a ridiculously bland statement, but it was the best I could manage. My mind was reeling. Yeah, he said, his voice soft. Tell me about it. He fell silent again, but his gaze was still on me, intense and probing. It felt like he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me past the door of 3A and the label of quiet neighbor. He was looking at Julian, and I had no idea who that person was supposed to be in this situation. The feeling was terrifying. I was exposed, stripped of my routines and my solitude, sitting in the dark with a man who was dismantling my entire world without even trying. Julian, he said, my name is Soft Sound in the dark room. Can I ask you something? I just nodded, my throat too tight for words. He hesitated, as if searching for the right way to phrase the question. He leaned forward a little, his elbows on his knees, bringing him closer into the small pool of candlelight. The shadows fell away from his face, and I saw the raw confusion in his eyes. It was the same look he'd had when he was standing soaked in my doorway, but this time it wasn't about a broken pipe. It was something deeper. I've been trying to figure some things out lately, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. About myself, about what I want. He looked down at his hands, then back up at me. And I see you, in the hall, or through the window, sometimes. And you're just you. You seem so sure of who you are. I almost laughed. Me? Sure of myself? The man who rehearsed phone calls before making them, who would rather starve than go to a crowded grocery store. It was the most inaccurate assessment of my character I had ever heard. But I saw the sincerity in his eyes. This was what he saw. A quiet man, content in his solitude. A man with his life in perfect, deliberate order. He saw the fortress, not the prisoner inside it. And when I'm around you, he continued, his voice dropping even lower, so low I had to strain to hear him over the rain. Tonight, it's the first time things have felt clear. Simple. He shook his head, a gesture of frustration. I don't know how to explain it. He looked at me, his gaze so direct, so vulnerable. It felt like a physical touch. Can you help me? Can you help me figure something out? I didn't know what he was asking. Not really, but I knew it was more than just a question. It was a plea. It was a confession wrapped in a riddle. The space between us crackled with a sudden, unbearable tension. My heart was a drum against my ribs, a frantic, wild thing. He started to lean in, slowly, hesitantly, his eyes never leaving mine. He was giving me every opportunity to pull back, to say no, to retreat back into the safety of my fortress. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to do just that. This is a mistake. He's confused. You're the convenient port in his storm. Run. But I didn't run. I was frozen, mesmerized by the raw honesty in his eyes. The world narrowed to his face, the scent of him, the heat radiating from his body. When his lips met mine, it wasn't a collision. It was a question. It was soft, hesitant, searching. It was not the kiss of a confident, experienced man, but of someone navigating a new and terrifying landscape in the dark. His lips were chapped from the wind, and for a second, my designer's brain registered the texture, the imperfection. Then all thought dissolved. I responded instinctively, a lifetime of buried, longing rising to the surface. It was a kiss of profound, staggering gentleness. My hand came up to cup his jaw, my thumb stroking the rough stubble on his cheek. I felt a tremor run through him, a deep shudder of what felt like relief. He deepened the kiss just slightly, and his hand came to rest on my knee, his touch warm and solid through the fabric of my jeans. It was an anchor in the swirling chaos of my emotions. We were just two people in the dark, finding a moment of quiet clarity in a world that had suddenly gone silent. The storm outside raged on, but in my living room, in that small, flickering circle of light, a different kind of storm had just broken. And I knew, with a terrifying and absolute certainty, that nothing would ever be the same. The morning came with a pale, watery light that felt like an intrusion. The rain had stopped, and the silence it left behind was profound. I woke up on the couch, a crick in my neck, the scratchy wool of the throw blanket tangled around my legs. For a blissful, disoriented second, I didn't remember. Then it all came flooding back in a single, brutal wave. The candles, the confession, the kiss. Alex. My eyes shot open. The apartment was still and silent. Too silent. I sat up, my heart beginning a frantic, panic tattoo against my ribs. I had given him my bed, insisting on it after our kiss had ended with a shared, breathless uncertainty. We hadn't spoken after that. The air was too thick, too charged with the enormity of what had just happened. He had retreated to the bedroom, and I had collapsed onto the couch, my mind a firestorm of hope and terror. I swung my legs off the sofa and stood up, the floorboards cold beneath my feet. I crept towards the bedroom, my breath held tight in my chest. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The bed was empty. The sheets were neatly, almost clinically, pulled back into place. He was gone. A cold dread, heavy and metallic, filled my stomach. It felt like I had swallowed a stone. I scanned the room, looking for any sign that he had been there at all. Nothing. It was as if the entire night had been a fever dream, a hallucination brought on by the storm. Then I saw it. On the small table in the entryway, next to my keys, was a single, folded piece of paper. My legs felt like lead as I walked towards it. This was it. The explanation. The apology. The let's just forget this happened note. My hand was trembling as I reached for it. I unfolded the paper. For words were written in a blocky, unfamiliar script. Thanks for everything. Alex. That was it. No phone number. No I'll call you. No mention of the kiss that had shattered my universe. Just a polite, dismissive thank you note. The kind you'd leave for a stranger who had helped you change a flat tire. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The hope that had flickered so brightly in the dark was extinguished, leaving behind a bitter, acrid smoke of humiliation. He had used me. He was confused, vulnerable, and I was there. A convenient experiment. A safe place to work out his issues before returning to his real life, his normal life. The anxiety, my old, familiar companion, wrapped its cold arms around me. The whispers started in my head, insidious and cruel. You idiot. You absolute fool. Did you really think he could want you? You, the quiet, anxious mess in 3A? He was just scared and alone. You were a warm body. Nothing more. I crumpled the note in my fist, the paper crackling in the oppressive silence of the apartment. I felt sick. The fortress I had built hadn't been strong enough. I had let him in, and he had walked out, taking with him a part of me I hadn't even known I was willing to give away. The rest of the day was a blur of self-recrimination. I tried to work, but the pixels on the screen swam before my eyes. Every sound from the hallway made me jump. Was it him coming back to retrieve something? Or worse, coming back with a new girlfriend, laughing about the weird guy next door? The silence from the other side of the bedroom wall was a physical presence. Before, it had been a neutral space. Now, it was a screaming void, an absence that was louder than any noise he had ever made. My quiet, ordered world had been returned to me, but it was tainted now. The solitude no longer felt like safety. It felt like a punishment. It felt like a cage I had locked myself back into. I replayed the kiss over and over in my mind, a masochistic loop of my own foolishness. I dissected every moment. His hesitation, was it reluctance? The softness of his lips, was it pity? His hand on my knee, was it just a casual, meaningless gesture? My own response, my eager, desperate response, made shame burn in my gut. I had been so transparent. I had laid my years of lonely wanting at his feet, and he had politely stepped over them on his way out the door. A full day passed, then another, 24 hours, 48 hours of agonizing silence. I heard nothing from his apartment. No sounds of repair, no voices, nothing. It was as if he had vanished from the face of the earth. The thought that I had scared him away was even worse than the thought that he had used me. Maybe my response to the kiss had been too much, too intense. Maybe I had horrified him, confirmed his fears about whatever he was figuring out. Maybe he was so repulsed by what had happened, by me, that he couldn't even bear to be in the same building. By the evening of the second day, I had worked myself into a state of numb resignation. It was over. It was a mistake, a strange anomaly, a story I would never tell anyone. I would go back to my routines, rebuild my walls even thicker and higher than before. I would learn from this. I would never, ever let my guard down again. I was making coffee, my movements stiff and robotic when I heard it. A knock on the door. Not a frantic banging this time, but a soft, hesitant rap. Once, twice. I froze, the coffee pot suspended in midair. It couldn't be. My heart started a slow, heavy thud, each beat a painful reminder of its own foolish capacity for hope. I told myself it was the building manager or a delivery. Anyone but him. I placed the pot down with a clatter and walked to the door, my entire body a rigid line of dread. I looked through the peephole. It was Alex. He looked terrible. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his jaw was covered in a rough, 2-day stubble. He was wearing a different shirt, but he had the same lost, wrecked expression he'd had the night of the storm. He wasn't looking at the door, but at his own feet, as if he couldn't bear to face it. He raised his hand to knock again, then let it fall, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He was about to turn away. An invisible force propelled me forward. I unlocked the door and pulled it open before he could leave. He flinched, startled, and his eyes shot up to meet mine. They were filled with a potent mixture of relief and raw, undisguised fear. We just stood there for a long moment, the silence stretching between us, thick with everything that had happened and everything that hadn't been said. "Hi," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. "Hi," I replied, my own voice tight. I didn't move from the doorway. I was guarding it, guarding myself. "Can I?" He gestured vaguely inside. "Can we talk?" I hesitated for a fraction of a second too long, and I saw a flash of pain in his eyes. He thought I was going to say no. The sight of it broke through my carefully constructed defenses. I stepped back, holding the door open. He walked in, and the familiar scent of him filled my space once more. It was agonizing. He didn't sit down this time. He stood in the middle of the living room, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, looking as out of place as he had 2 nights ago. "I'm so sorry," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "For just leaving like that." The note was, "That was cowardly. I'm a coward." "It's fine," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "You had a lot going on. Your apartment." "No." He cut me off, shaking his head fiercely. "No, it wasn't about the apartment. It was about that night." The kiss, he said the word, and it hung in the air between us, a tangible thing. I freaked out. "Julian." I woke up the next morning, and you were asleep on the couch, and I just panicked. I've never done that before. Kiss a guy. He finally looked at me, and his vulnerability was a punch to the gut. This wasn't the confident, arrogant man I had imagined for all those months. This was someone just as scared and confused as I was. Maybe more so. All I could think was that I had made a huge mistake, he continued, his voice cracking. That I'd taken advantage of you, of your kindness. I felt like a monster. So I ran. I went to my brother's place. I haven't slept in 2 days. I just kept seeing your face. My anger, the cold, hard shell I had built around my hurt, began to melt away, replaced by a wave of something else. Empathy. Understanding. He hadn't run because he was repulsed. He had run because he was terrified. We were two sides of the same frightened coin. I thought you ran because you regretted it. I confessed, my voice quiet. Because it was a mistake and you wanted to forget it happened. No, he said, taking a step closer to me. That's the thing. It's the only thing that hasn't felt like a mistake. It's the only thing that's felt real in. I don't know how long. And that's what scared me the most. He was standing in front of me now, so close I could feel the warmth from his body. These last 2 days have been hell. Because the only thing I wanted to do was come back here. Come back to you. To this quiet. The unspoken words hung in the air between us. The hope I had so brutally suppressed began to unfurl its tentative leaves again. I'm scared, Alex, I admitted, the confession a whisper. I've been on my own for a long time. It's safer. I know, he said, his voice gentle. He slowly reached out, not to touch me, but just holding his hand in the space between us, an offering. I'm scared too. I don't know what this is or what it means. All I know is that when I kissed you, it felt like coming home. And I've never felt that before. My eyes stung. The honesty in his voice was overwhelming. I looked at his outstretched hand, at the calloused fingers and the clean, short nails. It was the hand of a man who built things, who fixed what was broken. And here he was, offering to build something new, something terrifying and beautiful, right here in the ruins of my solitude. I placed my hand in his. His fingers closed around mine, his grip warm and sure. It wasn't a spark this time. It was a current, a steady flow of connection that ran from his hand to mine, up my arm, and settled deep in my chest, warming all the cold, empty places. He didn't pull me closer. He just stood there, holding my hand, his eyes searching mine. My apartments. Well, it's still a disaster zone, he said, a ghost of a smile on his face. They put up this industrial dehumidifier. Sounds like a jet engine. I couldn't help but smile back. Sounds noisy, I said. The noisiest, he agreed. I was wondering if maybe I could impose on you again. Just for tonight. The question was casual, but the weight behind it was immense. He wasn't asking for a place to crash because of a flood. He was asking to stay because he wanted to be with me. The couch is free, I said, my voice thick with emotion. He shook his head, his thumb stroking the back of my hand. I wasn't thinking of the couch, my breath hitched. He reached into his pocket with his free hand and pulled out a single, shiny key on a plain silver ring. He pressed it into my palm, his fingers closing mine around it. It's the key to my place, he said softly. The new lock, for when it's fixed. Just, so you have it. It was just a piece of metal, but it felt as heavy as a promise. It was an anchor, an invitation, a tangible act of trust that spoke louder than any declaration. It was him giving me access to his world, just as he had stumbled into mine. It was a key to a door I had never thought would be open to me. He was tearing down the wall between us, brick by brick. And this time I wasn't afraid. I was ready to help. The following weeks were a slow, gentle unfolding. Alex stayed with me while his apartment was being torn apart and put back together. The first few nights were hesitant, a careful dance of navigating this new, shared space. We would lie in my bed, inches apart, not touching, the darkness thick with a nervous, electric energy. We talked for hours, whispering our histories into the gloom. He told me about his ex-girlfriend, about the constant feeling of playing a role he didn't understand. I told him about my self-imposed isolation, about the fortress I had built to protect a heart I thought was too fragile for the world. Slowly, the inches between us disappeared, a hand finding another in the dark, a leg brushing against mine. One night, I woke from a nightmare, my heart pounding, and he was there, pulling me against his chest, his arms a solid, comforting weight around me. I fell asleep to the steady rhythm of his breathing, feeling safer than I had ever felt in my life. The fortress hadn't kept me safe, it had kept me hostage. True safety was this warmth, this presence beside me in the dark. His chaos began to bleed into my order, but it was a welcome invasion. His work boots appeared by my door, scuffed and mud-caked, a stark contrast to my own neat rows of shoes. A half-empty mug of coffee, his coffee, would be left on my perfectly clear kitchen counter. At first, the disruptions sent a jolt of my old anxiety through me. My instinct was to tidy up, to restore the order. But I stopped myself. The mess was a sign of life. His life intertwining with mine. The boots by the door meant he was here. The mug on the counter meant he would be back. They were not signs of chaos, but symbols of a new and wonderful kind of permanence. When his apartment was finally ready, we stood in his doorway together. It smelled of new paint and fresh cut wood. It was clean, empty, a blank slate. "Well," he said, looking around the vacant space. "Guess I should start moving my stuff back in." There was an awkward pause. The thought of him being back on the other side of the wall, of our shared space shrinking back to separate apartments, sent a sharp, cold pang of fear through me. He must have seen it on my face. He turned to me, a soft smile on his lips. "Or," he said, taking my hand, "most of it could probably just stay where it is." If that's okay, my heart swelled, a painful, joyful expansion in my chest. I just nodded, unable to speak. He squeezed my hand. "I like your quiet," he said. "Turns out it's what I was looking for all along." And so, our new routine began. A life lived across two apartments, but centered in one. We made coffee together in the mornings in my kitchen, my small, quiet space now filled with his easy laughter. Our movements became a comfortable choreography, a dance of two people who had learned the rhythm of the other. He would come home from a long day of work, smelling of sawdust and sweat, and I would leave the sanctuary of my desk to meet him at the door. Some nights we ate dinner in my apartment, some in his. We slept in my bed. The wall between our homes was no longer a barrier. It was just a wall. The real connection was the one we were building between us, stronger than any plaster or studs. I look back now at the man I was before the storm, the man who lived his life behind a peephole, observing the world from a safe and lonely distance. He was a man who believed that love and connection were for other people, for the loud, confident people like the one he imagined Alex to be. He didn't understand that strength and vulnerability were not opposites, that confidence could be a mask for fear, and that the quietest heart could hold the most profound capacity for love. Alex wasn't an invader who breached my fortress. He was the one who was given the key. He didn't shatter my quiet, ordered world. He filled its silence with a meaning I never knew it lacked. He was the plot twist in my quiet story, the beautiful, unexpected disruption that showed me that the safest place to be wasn't behind a wall, but in the arms of someone who saw you, truly saw you, and chose to stay. The solitude I had once mistaken for peace was just an absence. Alex was a presence, and his presence was, and is, my home.